let's see, we've got a couple of folks are ready. Welcome everyone who has signed in. We've got a nice group popping on here.
See 11.
Yeah, Evelyn's here and Jerry and Ben and a bunch of friends' names. It's always nice to see pop in. Looks like we've got 1 minute till we start. All right. Great.
See, Mike got on, so that was good.
Yeah, Mike is here.
Good.
Margaret Zuko, Kristen, Evelyn, Donna. All right, we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. We're just going to give people some time to hop on. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so people see the first slide here. All right. We're going to get started in just a moment.
Say hi to everyone.
I know. I want hugs is what I want.
Yeah, I can't see anyone's picture, but I see all your names.
I know, and I will go over in a few minutes, but we do have the chat function is enabled if you want to chat in the chat box. I'll go over that in a little bit. And I am going to, I see you, David. I'm going to make you a participant. I think I can. Hi, David.
Hello, Joby. Thank you for all your troubles.
I've made you into a panelist. We'll make you give a speech or something. It'll be great. But I think I can change role to attendee and then you can be anonymous and feel happy. Okay.
So for now, I'll just I'll mute.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to click this change role to attendee and we'll see what happens. There we go. So if you are attending, we've got a wonderful group signed on already. And it looks like we can get started, I think. Welcome, everyone. It is 1 o'clock and we're having our very first ever webinar today at Restore Justice. We've never done this before, so please forgive us if we're a little nervous or a little bit tentative on all of the different functions that this webinar can do. I am going to go ahead and share my screen so that you'll be able to see the presentation. And on your screen now, we're going to get started. So welcome. We're here today to talk about COVID-19 in Illinois prisons and to provide you all with some information and hopefully some advocacy tools that will be helpful to you in your work or with your loved ones who are perhaps incarcerated. I know many people on the call are here like us, have people in prison who they communicate with, family members, friends, and we are here to support them. So a little bit of housekeeping. So this is the part that I'm a little squishy about since it's our first time. So what I think will happen is participants, as you come onto the call, you're going to be muted. You're not going to be able to talk. And to avoid background noise and general chaos, we're gonna leave it that way for now, but there are 3 ways that you can get our attention. And those 3 ways are, first, you can use the group chat function. So on the bottom, I think most of you, on the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little chat bubble. And if you click on that, it'll open up a chat box and you can say what you need to say there. That will be seen by everyone and it will not be anonymous. If you want to get my attention or another one of our speakers' attention, you can go to the webinar controls and click raise hand. If you physically raise your hand, we won't see it. So we can't see you on this webinar. So you do have to use that raise hand function to be seen by us. And then the final way that you can get our attention is there is a Q&A function in this webinar. And so in the bottom, I think, again, on the bottom of your screen for most of you, you'll see a little Q&A box. There you can choose to ask a question anonymously that not everyone will see until it's answered. So that's another nice way to chime in and participate today. All right, housekeeping. So with that, I'm gonna actually, Julie's on the phone trying to help somebody come in to the call. So I'm gonna get started on her behalf by just letting this is. For those of you who are relatively new to Restore Justice, we are a policy organization that was founded from a group of lawyers and moms, mostly moms of incarcerated people, and civic leaders, activists, people who from about 2000 denial life without parole in Illinois. And that group started at Northwestern Law School as part of a full coalition there called the Coalition for the Fair Sentencing of Children. And one of the brilliant things the coalition's leaders did in 2008 was they reached out to family members of juvenile lifers and asked them to come in and start talking with each other. So I'm gonna pass the baton to Julie. She's gonna tell you just a little bit more about CRIC, which is now a part of Restore.
Hi, everyone and family members and those who are just care. I see a lot of you. We can see you're participating, but can't see their pictures because this is a webinar. Just a little bit about CRIC. We began meeting at Bloom Legal Clinic in about 2007. My son Eric was incarcerated and sentenced to life without parole in 1995. So for about 10 or 15 years, I really didn't have anyone to turn to or anything to do, and I, kind of felt very alone, isolated. And when they called this family group together, it took a little while, but we really bonded. In 2011, we actually became CRIC and started coordinating our own meetings. And there we became family and people began to support each other and listen. And it was, you could really connect with everyone because they were living the same thing as you. And since then, with the advent of some great court decisions, some of the people that we thought we'd never see out, Wendell being one of them, actually were out and we got to meet people's sons, and we expanded to include other family members and people who have extreme sentences, but we're still under, say, the age of 25. We really believe those are young people with extreme sentences. So we really do a lot of advocacy. These people, all these family members really care. A lot of their sons are out or have dates they're gonna get out, but they're still the ones to hop on the bus and help us in Springfield. No one can talk to a legislator like a family member. So we've learned to lean on each other, and through Restore Justice, we're actually doing some pretty good advocacy work. Out. Over and out.
Julie out. Thank you, Julie. I'm going to move on now to a quick poll. We are doing what I would usually do is, at this point, if we were doing a training, I would ask people to, do you have a loved one in prison? And people would stand up or sit up and say yes or no or whatever. And it's a wonderful way to get to know people and who is on the webinar, and it helps us to target our comments a little bit. So there's a poll active right now, and if you see it, take it. And oops, it's the wrong poll. End polling. Oops, sorry. I gave you the wrong poll. See, I knew I was going to do something. I'm going to relaunch with this one. Sorry about that. I'll open up the other one again a little later. So this is just a who are you? And we want to know, this is anonymous. We want to know if you have a loved one who's in prison, or a friend, if you have a lawyer, if you're a lawyer with clients in prison, or if you're just here because you care, or you work in the field and you are interested in learning a little bit more. And we'll just let you guys continue to take that as we're going. We have 60% of everybody has voted, and I will report out on that in a moment. So keep on voting. So I'm going to get started with our sort of basic presentation here, which is really just information that we've compiled at Restore Justice about the state's reaction to COVID-19 in our prison system. There isn't a slide for this, but for those of you, I know I have a couple of people who might be coming in from outside of Illinois. So just a quick refresher, we have 28 prisons in Illinois that today house just under 37,000 people. Just under half of those people are incarcerated for so-called violent offenses. And the vast majority of the people who are incarcerated in Illinois are from Cook County. And they tend to, it's a huge amount of racial disparity. And we are focused on, as an organization, people who serve extreme long sentences. So as we look at the state of emergency and our response to what the state has done with COVID-19, we are really focused on this idea that people who are serving long sentences in general are getting the shortest end of the stick in terms of the state response. And so we've been very focused on trying to help the people who are unlikely to get out, who are unlikely to be eligible for the kinds of early releases that we hear most about in Illinois. So as we go through the presentation, just know that our basic predisposition is to focus on people who have longer sentences. That doesn't mean that's all we do, but that tends to be where we focus our efforts. So COVID-19 hit Illinois, and in early March, it started to hit really publicly, and we started seeing, people, individuals or organizations were changing their behaviors. We entered our state of emergency on March 21st. Doesn't that feel like a long time ago? There have been really no changes to our stay-at-home policy since that time. We've had 2 now rounds of 30-day stay-at-home orders. And the governor has announced and has been promoting a plan that we lovingly think he stole the name from us. Our first C4 name is Restore Justice Illinois, and he named his Illinois recovery plan Restore Illinois. So we think flattery is the most sincere form of a compliment here. Or wait, I got that wrong. See, I'm nervous. Look what this webinar is doing to me, people. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, is what I meant to say. I'm calming down now. We haven't had any changes to the stay-at-home order, but it's about to change. So by the end of May, we're going to start moving into new phases as a state based on metrics, health metrics. And the health metrics are actually, we're meeting them all now. And so it looks like we will be able to move into phase 3 of recovery in the next couple weeks. And then the next phase after that, phase 4, also has restrictions in it. And then the last phase is phase 5, when we have a vaccine or a treatment that makes it back to normal, so to speak. But I want to note that at least that even if we're in phase 3, which we would likely be in for 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, still prohibits gatherings of more than 10. So that we're still taking this very seriously. Everything is open. So even if things do change at the end of May, it will not be a wide open door in Illinois. And we'll get to why this matters for prisons in a minute. So we're still going to be in a situation at least through, I'm guessing, through June, where there will be no gatherings more than 10 people out here in the world. Our legislative session was in its height in mid-March. So those of you who've done our advocacy training or have come on advocacy days with us know that right around now we'd be chickens with our heads cut off running around Springfield if we still had live bills. So what happened in mid-March was legislature went home and they paused. They didn't cancel session immediately, they just paused it. What they've decided now is they're going to have this kind of not remote session, they can't legislate remotely, but they're going to have a session today and a couple other days this week in Springfield in a convention center where they can distance. And they've made an agreement not to discuss any bills that are not COVID related. So they have a very limited list of topics. So no criminal justice bills will be heard or discussed, any bills. It'll be basically the state budget and any kind of necessary COVID-19 action. They also have no way to legislate remotely without enabling legislation. So I don't know if there'll be something in this session that happens this week about how they could learn or enable themselves to do remote legislating. That would probably be too big to bite off this week, but it may come up. In the Illinois prison system, I have a really distinct memory. I was actually supposed to go visit my loved one who's at Hill Correctional Center. I think it was the 19th, around the 18th or 19th of March. And it was whatever that weekend is after the 17th. And I had to cancel my visit because the Department of Corrections ended visits on the 17th. And there were quite a few people at that time who weren't taking COVID very seriously and who were really upset about visits being suspended. And I did some research and I started thinking, wow, this is probably a good thing that we've suspended visits to protect people in the system. What was really concerning to a lot of us at that point was it took until the 26th of March to stop transfers into and among prisons in the system. And there's currently pressure to restart, and we can cover that or talk about that a little later and how advocacy is evolving. But having those transfers stopped has been a huge factor in limiting the spread of COVID-19 in prisons, or at least we think. One of the themes you'll hear from us today quite a bit is that we can only report out to you the information that's publicly reported by our government. And it's been very sporadic and it's very patchy. So we've done the best we can to try to take the facts, the information that the Department of Corrections and the governor's office puts out, and to put it into some kind of a context to make it make sense, and to filter out any data that seems inconsistent, or to highlight and flag where the data is really, really spotty or unreliable for some reason. So the biggest area of concern for us is that as of the 7th of May, IDOC, the Illinois Department of Corrections, reported that they had only tested about 600 people in the department. They did not provide a detailed report, and they did not share which facilities had tests. The only report they share shares the facilities that have a confirmed case on staff or for an incarcerated person. As of the 17th, they update that every day at the Department of Corrections, 345 incarcerated people tested positive for COVID-19 at 18 facilities. So there were still, as of that time, there were 10 facilities that had 0 cases, supposedly. And 301 staff had tested positive. The 600 tests that were done with an IDOC, according to a somewhat vague statement by the department, those 600 tests were just incarcerated people, not staff. So if this is to be believed, we have 345 positive incarcerated cases on 600 tests. And those of you who've been following the news on the virus probably know that this isn't how the virus works. We don't have a 55% positive rate. In fact, in Illinois, we've been looking at getting our positive rate in most places below 15%. So it's a very strange number. We do know in some facilities where people have been tested in other states, or where massive testing has gone on, that the rate's been much higher, that because of the really rapacious nature of this virus, that a far higher number of people are testing positive in prisons and in congregate settings because of the nature of the virus itself. So it wouldn't be surprising to see a high positive rate, but with a number of 600 tests, we really can't say. And finally, and probably one of our hardest metrics is our death totals. IDOC is not reporting deaths publicly, but as of the 11th, they confirmed to a local journalist that 12 deaths have been confirmed, all at Stateville Correctional Center. Again, if we're not testing widely and folks are in hospitals near their facilities and they pass away and go to a coroner of an underlying, and they may or may not have had COVID and we don't know because they weren't tested, but perhaps they died of pneumonia, we won't know. It'll take a long time to shake that number out. So there's a lot we don't know. When the virus first struck, and many of you who follow us on social media saw and hopefully saw in the newspapers and on television as well, that we and our colleague organizations pushed very, very hard for early releases. Really from probably the second week of March on, we were hammering the governor to do a meaningful number of releases. And for us, that number was about 9,000 people. To get a system that at the time was over 27,000 down by 9,000 would give each facility, spread across facilities, would give each facility space to do some distancing. It would free up medical supplies. It would free up doctor and nurse time. It would free up local ICU beds in the county or nearby hospital systems. And we, unlike, I think, maybe the more unique aspect of our recommendations, we worked with the Illinois Prison Project to only recommend things that were legally possible and viable within current statute, that the governor would not need to do. There would be no special session. We would need a change in any laws. Every recommendation we made was something the governor could just do, or the Illinois Department of Corrections could just do. And those fell into three major buckets. The first one on this slide is called EDSC and ED, which is, they're horrible little non-acronyms. Earned discretionary sentencing credits and electronic detention. So our theory was that if people are even within a year of their exit date already, particularly if they have a longer sentence, what's the purpose of keeping them? To take up space and to be just another risk factor in a crowded congregate setting. So earned discretionary sentence credits are something that's on the books, that right now today a warden can look at his prison population or her prison population with the counseling staff at that facility, and they can recommend that somebody who is within 6 months of their exit date be given earned discretionary sentencing credits that amount to time off for good behavior, so to speak. Some can also recommend that folks in there who are close to release can go on electronic detention. And those have in fact been the two major methods that have been used. The other two are clemency and furloughs. So clemency is a process where a governor or the president in federal cases can look at someone's conviction and can, through the clemency process, review them and either commute their sentence, e.g. shorten it or get rid of it altogether and give them a new one, or pardon them altogether for their crime. Clemencies are in, vast majority of them are used, are commutations and not pardons. And furlough, medical furlough is, you've probably heard a lot about, is the, basically where an inmate, an incarcerated person or the staff at the facility can say, this individual is at high risk medically. They have documented medical conditions that put them at much higher risk, and we can send them home to do a medical furlough or to a hospital or a care facility where they could get the kind of care they need. We also focused a lot on things like access to soap and cleaning supplies. Our colleague Julie, who you met earlier, visited her son at Illinois River Correctional Center the day before, I think the day or 2 days before visits were eliminated. And she managed to smuggle her phone into the waiting room bathroom and photographed the lack of soap in the waiting room bathroom in the open area before you go in through security. And it was one of the most horrifying photos because it really showed not just an empty soap bottle, but how incredibly, run down and dirty these facilities are. Very difficult to make the case that they're doing a good job with hygiene on whatever day that was, March 14th. And we were very concerned that without visits, without one-on-one personal visits, that incarcerated people would lose access to their loved ones. And their loved ones would lose access to information about their care. And in some cases we were right, in some cases we were wrong. We'll get to that a little later, but overall, we've learned over the years and through our experience with loved ones in prison that in-person visits are really the best way for incarcerated people to share confidential or personal information without fear of being heard or censored, or perhaps even punished for things that they share with folks outside. So we were very concerned about that and had a number of advocacy recommendations around those things. And I'm going to pause really quickly and just ask Alyssa, does anyone have any deal breaker questions yet, or should I keep going?
No, I think we can keep going. We had some good questions, but I think, you know, I've answered with text, and then when we get toward the end, I can let you embellish or
okay.
add on.
Great. I just wanted to make sure we weren't ignoring anybody. It's hard for me to tell getting used to this format here. So this slide is sort of a little depressing. And so I want you guys to hold on to your seats. I don't want you to get too depressed. My first title for this was We Lost. And I changed it to We Won Some and Lost More. Because I do think we did make some progress as advocates, as a community, as loved ones, as family members, as lawyers, as advocates out here, activists. But overall, I think we lost the larger part of the story, which is that incarcerated people needed a dramatically more significant set of solutions for COVID-19 than they got. And that the governor's office sort of checked the box of having done as much as he was willing to do on the first round of these advocacy asks that we all had. And he isn't going to do anything more on those asks. So our challenge today is really to transition. And so before we transition, we kind of have to do, as Wendell likes to call it, a postmortem on, got to do a postmortem on the body of our first round of advocacy asks and what happened. And I would say probably the most disappointing has been around early release, that we've a deeply overcrowded system, a far over capacity system, and reducing pressure on medical capacity, particularly in rural communities, was a huge priority for us. And again, we said that it would take pretty quickly 9,000 people coming out the door to be meaningful as a way to create space in the system, create resources. And unfortunately, we're still, as of today, at under 1,200 or under 1,300 total early releases. And how those break down, 1,126 of those releases were earned discretionary sentencing credits, that good time that wardens and facilities have the option to give. The vast majority of those people were getting out under 6 months anyway, most under 3 months, till their exit date anyway. So that was just literally pushing people out the door a little quicker. The governor has done a few more than 20 clemencies. And the good news on clemencies is that the mechanism is now rolling a little faster. It's paused for a minute, and they are trying to streamline the clemency process since there are so many requests. And finally, the state has processed 108 medical furloughs. When it came to accessing for soap and cleaning supplies, Wendell's going to talk about this a little later, but it was incredibly mixed response. So we would get a victory in the department saying they delivered huge trucks of soap rolling down the highway, the photos on Twitter, sending soap to people in prison. And then we would get feedback that folks were getting a squirt of watered down bleach on a rag every other day, or a quarter cup of a liquid detergent once a week, which clearly isn't adequate to keep one space clean. And finally, we were advocating for access to communications, which in some cases I think was successful, and in others it was not, really based on the facility and the conditions at each facility.
Joby,
yeah.
A relevant question about whether people who are incarcerated have to pay for hand sanitizer.
Yeah, so one of the things that we saw happen, it's a really yucky aspect of our system, is our system's overcrowded and underfunded and relies on incarcerated people and their families to support a lot of the sort of quote unquote discretionary items that incarcerated people have access to, including soap and cleaning supplies. So in the beginning, particularly in March and into the first week of April, before the department was doing a more thorough job at making sure their inventory was being spread across the system, there were folks who were reporting to us at a number of prisons that they were having to pay for their own cleaning supplies out of commissary, and that commissary was running out, or that they were not allowed to access commissary. And Wendell can talk about that a little bit more later, but it's definitely been an issue. So I just want to give you a sense of why and how concerned we are about this mixed response from the department. So if you look at this, this is a weird chart, and it's just going to take a second to get our heads around it together. But I picked 5 of the 28 facilities, and these 5 facilities are either maximum security facilities or max mediums. And the reason I chose them is because they're the 5 facilities I think we as a team know best. It's where most of our loved ones are. And many of the people we communicate with are housed at these facilities. There are also facilities with high numbers of longer term inmates. So this is again, going back to our group, our reason for existing are these people who are serving really extreme sentences. And a lot of them are aging. So we were really concerned about, we're concerned about everybody at every prison, but these 5 were a good kind of case study for this particular chart. Stateville is where we've had our major outbreak. And as you can see, there's 2,400 people at Stateville. I can't guarantee that number is accurate as of today, that the numbers change on their website. It's really difficult to get an accurate count, but that's what we suspect based on what they reported as of yesterday. And as of yesterday or the day before, they had 563 cases of staff and incarcerated people together. So it's both. They have only released early since 5/14, 211 people. So as you can see, 211 is not an enormous share of 2,467, right? So if you're trying to make a meaningful reduction in the size of a population in a prison, 200 people in a population of 2,400 isn't probably enough. What they have done is they've opened up some really ugly and unsafe parts of the facility. The notorious Roundhouse, the F House, has been reopened as a quarantine relief space to deal with this outbreak there. COVID-19 has been really widespread in their county, and they've had some, in the early days, real crunches at the local hospitals. There are only 115 ICU beds in that region for quite a few cases. So then let's look at the other side of the story. We have a place like Hill Correctional Center, fewer people to begin with, 24 confirmed cases. Again, we have no idea how many people they're testing, but from what we hear, a lot of people are sick, and only 5 early releases. At Illinois River, though, very similar to Hill, almost identical physical layout, very, very similar population. Maybe they're serving Illinois River slightly shorter sentences. They have 0 confirmed cases, but they've let out 124 people. So what this says to me is that there's no, there may be an articulated or an intention behind this plan, but my sense is that it's very one-off, that every facility is sort of handling this on their own. They may be getting guidance from the Illinois Department of Corrections, but they are using the tools like earned discretionary sentencing credit at will. If that's not the case, perhaps IDOC is being a little bit more directive, then I think it would be take a magician. Maybe we need a data magician to help us figure out what the rationale is behind these. But at a place like Menard, I just want to talk about Menard really quickly. Menard was for a long time our largest maximum security prison. The population there has dramatically reduced over the past several years as they've moved people out. The facility is crumbling. It's an ancient facility and a dangerous facility. They've only had 4 confirmed cases. Again, we don't know about the testing, but they have had an outbreak in the county. It's a very, very sparse rural area downstate, but they've had 237 cases, and they only have 23 ICU beds, and Menard's only done 18 early releases. So when I look at a place like Menard, that's the place I'm most fearful around, because it has such an elderly and aging population that it's so far from most of the news media, whereas Stateville is closer to the Chicago area and the news media has a little bit more access. So it's very concerning that it's so mixed, this response. So I'm gonna give you the results of our first poll. Almost everybody participated, and a third of you on this call have a family member in prison. And so when you hear all of the things I'm saying, I hope you'll stick with us through the end of this, because I'm gonna get through the really depressing part and get to the more hopeful part soon. Another third of you have a friend in prison. We've got a couple lawyers, and the remaining third are people who care. And you know, I really love you guys. I'm going to share our results, and I am going to launch our second poll. And this is a poll that we, you know, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm sort of new to this whole polls thing, but I am curious how you all feel about the transparency situation in our system. So based on what you've seen so far, you can tell that there's a lot of information we don't have, and it's really difficult to develop an advocacy solution. What are we asking for? What do we want? What do we need out of the system when we don't have good, accurate data coming in? So one of the things that we were curious about was what, I'm trying to figure out this polling thing while I'm talking, and it's hard. Nope. Okay, we may not poll because I can't figure it out, but maybe Alyssa can poll. I'll ask Alyssa to try to poll. There are two questions, and it's not the one that we just did. But one of the things we've really been wrestling with as a team is how do we make change in this environment? How do we get better results for people in this environment? How do we get more people out? How do we protect the safety of more people who can't get out and who aren't getting out? And that's really one of our founding principles at Restore Justice has been, how do we help real people right now? In the absence of our regular policy agenda, our ability to lobby, how do we make change? So I'm gonna just breeze past that poll unless Alyssa's figured it out. Let's just breeze past it. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not technologically savvy enough for this fancy polling. I did one.
I don't think I have the option to.
Okay. I think there is, what I wanted to share is that we've tried to evolve our advocacy demands. And this isn't just us. I think we've tried to take a leadership role where we can, but we have a really robust and wonderful advocacy community, and I'll share some names of other organizations toward the end of the presentation. But we've decided to sort of focus on the transparency piece first, because with all of the obscuring of data and the lack of data on what's actually happening, it's incredibly difficult to develop rational, reasonable policy solutions or administrative solutions to some of the problems we're seeing. So we've made our sort of bedrock of this month and maybe next month if we have to, a need to increase pressure on transparency in terms of testing, hospitalizations, and deaths. This is going to be extremely difficult, and the system is not designed to comply with these types of requests, but and many of you have helped us with letters and with calls. We've been doing quite a bit of media on these topics to try to bring the governor's focus around to testing and transparency. We also feel like we're needing to work with our partners and our friends out there in the world to develop a more nuanced, localized set of advocacy strategies around prisons themselves. That while we do have a central office for the Illinois Department of Corrections, we do not have a history of centralized control. So, despite, I think, some really strong efforts at the Department of Corrections, and I will give them kudos for trying, the history of decentralization in IDOC is just overwhelming. So how do we as a community come together and develop a strategy for Galesburg, for Hill, a strategy around Illinois River, a strategy for Randolph County, the Randolph County Coroner's Office, and Menard Correctional Center, which are inextricably linked through through bonds of generations, really, in that community. How do we make that happen? It's a much different type of advocacy than we're used to doing, and so we're really in the beginning stages of figuring that out. The final point, and I think the first 2 points lead into the third, the final point is that we need to bring down our prison population, period. That 36,910 people is still far too many. Our system was designed to house half of that, a little bit over half of that, I believe. I'm gonna have to check that. And these facilities are still overcrowded. They are still keeping many people who don't need to be in prison and don't belong in prison for a variety of reasons. And those of you who know us know our policy positions on things like extreme sentencing and gun enhancements, felony murder and accountability, and the like. And we can talk about those another time. But since we can't work on them this year anyway, in terms of legislation, we feel that this is an enormous opportunity to highlight how dangerous overcrowding is in Illinois prisons. And we need to find some new pressure points on early release as we go forward. So those of you who've done our advocacy training know we spend a lot of time looking at where the power lies, who's making the decisions. And right now we're in a very strange time in many states and in Illinois, maybe more so than in some others. Our emergency powers have been evoked maybe, for our governor. And for better or worse, it's all on him. Because of the emergency power and the executive orders he's put out there, he's put win-lose on his chest. If he's successful, he wins. If he's not, it's all on him. It's gonna be his fault. And that's for everything. That's for the whole COVID-19 response. And I happen, this is a personal opinion, not an organizational opinion. I watch the governor every day at 2:30, and I have an enormous amount of respect for how he's handled the situation overall. But in terms of a power dynamic, his vulnerability on every issue really right now is huge because he doesn't have any check or balance meaningfully in this process. The legislature does not have any procedural pathway to him. He is a person, it seems, and our lobbyist has confirmed this, who believes in cultivating relationships. He's legislating to the middle, not to one side or the other. So he's spending a huge amount of time talking to legislators, but that's talk. It's one-on-one conversations, small groups, committees. It's not a process or a procedure to get to the governor. So we don't have, for example, a normal advocacy activity this time of year would be to send a letter to legislators to ask them to support something in committee. Well, there is no committee. There isn't a procedural way for advocates to get into this process. So it's very challenging. We've also watched county boards assert themselves a little bit, and their role in our state government has become a little bit clearer. We have 102 counties in Illinois. Only one of them is Cook County. And sometimes it feels like Cook County is our whole state if you're up here. It isn't. And some of the counties have an extraordinary amount of power and influence in their local communities and statewide. And those county boards may be an area where we can develop some advocacy strategies that might be more effective than just constantly hammering at the governor every day. And finally, with some really notable and yucky exceptions, which if you look at the news in Illinois, you've probably seen, there are some very yucky exceptions, but for the most part, electeds have been staying in their lane, which is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on where you're sitting politically at this time. But for the most part, we have people who are saying, that's the governor's job. State's Attorney Kim Foxx is asked to weigh in on statewide things all the time. And we're very disappointed sometimes when she does not. Actually, we're often disappointed. We're really disappointed. I can't overstate that. But from the governor's point of view, or from her point of view, she's staying in her lane. She's not trying to get into issues that she sees as the Department of Corrections purview. We would like her to be more creative and to help save some lives, get some people out, using her authority that she has, and she has not done that. Elected officials are staying in their lane for the most part. So the pressure points that we have available to us as advocates, and you guys all have available to you as advocates, in the governor's office, there seem to be 3 seats of power around the issues around incarceration and issues around criminal legal reform. And those 3 centers are not always in agreement, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I'm not making a value judgment on that, but they're all there and they're vying with each other sometimes. Some are ascendant, some are a little bit sometimes not as effective, based on if you've ever worked in a bureaucracy, who's winning on that day. And right now, the 3 centers of power in the governor's office seem to be the Lieutenant Governor's office, Juliana Stratton, who is very much in the know about criminal legal reform in Illinois. Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell, who was the czar over the marijuana legislation that was passed last year. And then the governor's chief of staff, his political staff, and his policy staff, who seem to be the most dominant in this equation at this time. We do not have an approved or a confirmed director of the department. We have an acting director, in Director Jeffries, and his communications department and legal department have been pretty on point. They've been responding when people have questions and issues. And finally, we have the Prisoner Review Board, which is, the Prisoner Review Board is the entity that used to do parole before 1978, when we used to have parole, and that now does clemency reviews for the governor, and has a number of other tasks that they undertake, including the marijuana commutations that were coming through after the passage of that law. And the Prisoner Review Board has played a huge role with the Department of Corrections legal team in processing early releases. So they're an individual pressure point as well in the system. So I'm gonna pause here. I haven't had a chance, because I've been yammering, I haven't had a chance to look at questions. So I'm gonna pause and ask Alyssa if there has been anything in the chat or anything in the questions that I ought to address before we move on to Wendell talking about our tracking system.
I will just, a couple of the questions we answered, but I think might give people a little more insight into restored justice. One is, when we're working on legislation, what role do family members of victims play? And Julie gave a really nice answer, but I think everyone would benefit from hearing it.
So do you want Julie to answer? Yeah, go for it, Julie.
It can be both of you, or?
Julie, go first.
Okay, I just said that, victims are not all the same. They fall into several categories. And the most extreme ends, we have people who find their way through to restorative justice practices and forgiveness. And then on the other end, you have people who always want the maximum amount of punishment. It's very difficult. They're a part of the thing, but if your victims' families fall on that end of punishment, it makes it, there's no fairness, there's no anything about it. It makes it much more difficult for you and for anything to go forward. The courts, our system in general, really lets victims be a part of proceedings like that. So unfortunately, there isn't an answer.
Yeah, I agree with Julie. I think one thing I want to share is that over the years, I've gone to courtrooms and sat in courtrooms with victim family members who were being managed by the prosecution as part of the scene of the courtroom, and just observing their pain and their anger is really, it's affecting. It's really awful. And I've also spent time with victim family members who've, as Julie said, gone through restorative processes and who are completely different people now. And whose literally whose physical presence is transcendent. And I find that the use of staging, that act of staging in the beginning and on a court, a sentencing date, or on a, during the trial, if there is a trial, that staging is really, really powerful, not just for the people being impacted, the jury, perhaps if there's a jury, if they're lucky enough to have gone to trial, or if there's the judge, the other people in the room. I think it impacts backwards as well. I think it impacts on the victim family members as well. And I think it anchors itself in their hearts. And I'm not a victim family member and I can't speak for them, but we've had incredible experiences with people advocating with us who've lost people, who've lost loved ones. And there are organized victim family members in Springfield who are extremely powerful and effective at leveraging that moment of pain that they shared on the court date or at the sentencing date 20 years later. And that is a very difficult thing to combat. Whenever you're comparing pain, one person's pain against another person's pain, nobody wins. Nobody wins. So over the years, we've just done our best to sort of build relationships where we can, and where we can't, where the relationship isn't possible for a variety of reasons, to stick to our core message about what's fair and right for everyone, and with as much compassion as we can, just keep walking.
And I would just add, our coworker would say this, I think, if he was here, but there are a lot of victim family members who are also on the other side. And so I think, it's important to recognize that people don't just necessarily fit into one category. And I think some of the data shows actually that a lot of family members do support really looking at the system. And then one thing I'll say is several people have asked if Joby's going to share the slides, and I do think she's going to share the whole presentation. And then Joby, I thought maybe you could just, for the group, I thought Linda had a really good question about clemency versus commutation. If you just share that with everyone.
I will, and then we'll move in. You'll get to know Wendell a little bit after I'm done with this part. So it's a weird one to figure out, commutation and clemency, and for a long time I thought they were interchangeable, and they aren't. So someone explained it to me this way, that clemency is a sandwich, commutation is a tuna fish sandwich, and pardon is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So a clemency is the category, and the commutation is a part of, could be the choice of clemency that the governor goes down. I wish I could take a poll to see if that made sense. I can't see your faces, it's horrible. So a clemency is the process the governor goes through to review a person who has exhausted every other possible means of release, that they're no longer, or maybe not, maybe that's not a criteria, but they're reviewing people outside of the normal judicial process. And as part of that, they can do two things. One is they can commute the sentence, meaning they can kind of get rid of the sentence and give a new sentence that could amount to time served or some other term of years. In Iowa, when many of the states were wrestling with juvenile life without parole laws after Miller v. Alabama, the Iowa governor took all of the juvenile lifers and commuted their sentences and gave them all 60 years, which we were all horrified by, because that basically was saying they're going to do 60 years. None of them are going to get a chance at an individualized hearing. That's not an ideal commutation situation. The commutations the governor has done in the past 2 months have been time served commutations, so they've gone home. The other flavor of clemency is the pardon, and the pardon is, you're good. That's my non-legal interpretation of what a pardon is, and I hope it's helpful. Any other questions, Alyssa, before I pass the baton to Wendell? No? Okay, so Wendell Robinson is our incredible program manager at Restore Justice. And Wendell, would you introduce yourself and just a tiny bit about who you are, and then talk a little bit about our tracking efforts?
First, but I wish it was a way that they can give Job an applause. She did a wonderful job with her presentation. I mean, you guys may not know, but us as staff know that all that information Joby acquire comes more so from just her passion about these different causes, and way to give it to you guys. So big ups to Joby. But so I'm Wendell Robinson. I'm a former juvenile lifer. I served just over 25 years. I'm a program manager at RJ right now, and by me serving, an extreme sentence, as a IDOC. So I'm able to, track pretty much a lot of things that's going on in different facilities. I get, countless calls every day from guys in IDOC, and I kind of like have my finger on the pulse of what's going on in IDOC based on these different calls. So we just one of our great staff members came up with a tracker, and we got these questions together that we asked these guys, and we have this information. But I think one of the one of the one of the one of the most important things that I'm gonna say about before I start talking about this tracker in different facilities is one thing that's consistent in IDOC, and that's inconsistencies. Only one that's confused, because a lot of the information is confusing because there's really no uniformity within the department. So things range from facility to facility, even within those facilities, from housing unit to housing unit. I talked to a range of guys, maybe from early 20s all the way up into their 60s, and I get just different perspectives. But the first thing that I really want to touch on is like early on, talking to guys, I think it was a lot of confusion and some panic because guys really, had no idea as to what was going on, depending on and and I can kind of understand that if you in a place where you already isolated and you think that you should be in the safest space, but to understand how this or just to have little knowledge about how this disease is spreaded, knowing that if you're in a space that is extremely hard to space, is going to be extremely bad for those guys. So like I say, early on, it was mixed feelings. Like, guys were in a panic. They didn't know what to do or how to respond to certain things. And then we had like guys was having problems getting they medication. um it was like once again, and then other institutions is like, man, they haven't had meds in X amount of weeks or days or whatever. So it's just no uniformity with the dispensing of meds, or for the most part most things. And then communication. um there are a few different ways of communicating within IDOC. Of course, they have phones, they have mail, they have email, and they have some people call them video visits, some of them call video calls. And it was like with those four different means of communication, I think for a period of time they had suspended one of them. And then you have, of course, snail mail, that just what it is, snail mail. was that was kind of difficult too, because you had some guys that really didn't want to use the phone, because if the phone not being cleaned the proper way, who knows who had it prior to them, um if they gonna spread something to those guys. um and I think but now, as of lately, I think phone calls, all of the ways of communication have been restored. Then you have another thing, like you have the commissary. You have guys that have to buy, certain hygiene items, plus the food that they are limited to buy. They giving them like maybe like, and I know in certain institutions, they allowing the guys to spend a certain number a month. Then you have other institutions that's allowing them to spend a certain amount each week. But like I say, it just varies from institute uniformity, and even with something like that commissary and some of the things that those guys can buy. And then like the cleaning supplies. I mean, it's sad, and like I talked to a lot of different people, and I know one phone call I got kind of stuck out to me because it's a person that's really, really near and dear to me. And it was probably like the midway point through us being in this lockdown or whatever. And I'm talking to a friend, a dear friend of mine, and I'm like, man, you sound congested. And he was like, no, I'm not congested. I'm all right. And he had to use security as to, you know, the phone being cleaned or the phone being, you know, suitable for him to use with the sock. And it was like that you know that kind of you know that I was real touched by that. But just the cleaning supplies, it's like you know, in some institutions I've heard where they doing like an amazing job. And in other institutions, it's like they can do a whole lot better. They not giving them cleaning supplies on a regular. As Joby said earlier, you know, like some places giving guys like a few squirts of bleach water on a rag to clean they cell, maybe a little bit of liquid soap. Some places may pass out you know, little really small bars of what they call state soap. But once again, like I say, there is no uniformity across the department because even just talking to older guys or younger guys, you know, a lot of younger guys may feel like they ready to, you know, open back up the facilities so they can start back going to yard or, you know, just some sense of normalcy within the department. But then you have older guys that's pretty much scared to even come out they cell. I've heard situations where you have an older guy like he don't even want to come out and to you know, take the chance on possibly getting sick. So I think for the most part, as I said, the one consistency in IDOC is inconsistency. And I'm gonna pass it back to Joby.
Thank you, Wendell. So what Wendell mentioned earlier, we call it the tracker. And so as we sort of segue into the last section of our webinar today, we'll be talking a little bit about how you can help. And since so many of you, 60% of you on this call have a friend or a family member in the Illinois Department of Corrections, 60% of you, and that's a lot of people. And what we've been relying on to build our advocacy in the absence of actual data are right now, as of today, 400 reports that we've taken and documented from friends and family members, including Wendell and Julie and myself and others on staff who have regular contact with folks. But from people like you who have a call with your loved one, and then you go on to our website and you enter into the tracker and you jot down what you, the answers to the questions that we've prepared. And this gives us this real sense of an evolution, as Wendell said, of what's been happening in facilities, facility by facility. And right now we're actually working on, it's not done yet, a facility by facility profile based on the tracker responses. And it'll be interesting to see as we get more data, as we start more freedom of information requests and more data starts flowing, how close we are to accurate based on sort of valid, sort of viable reports from facilities across the state. If we guessed right that they actually had cases when they were saying they didn't, I think we're going to be right when it comes around, but I don't know. We could be wrong. I'm open to that always. So thank you, Wendell, for sharing that. It's really important to remember, especially when we look at numbers and people have been arguing about numbers of early releases, that the vast majority of people, even in our most aggressive early release scenario where we had 9,000 people get out, if we had been successful early on, we're still looking at 30, you know, in that scenario, 25,000 people who wouldn't be getting out. And so that's a lot of people to protect in a system where congregate settings and lack of hygiene is the norm. So I'm going to move on, unless Alyssa, do you have anything you want me to cover before we get into the what you can do section?
There was a good question about kind of what percentage or what our direct action looks like versus procedural. And I think by direct action, it's kind of like our social media, our email and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'll get into that in a little bit. Before I kind of get into that too deeply, I will say that we're just one organization, and there are a lot of organizations in this space that do all sorts of different things, and I want to talk about them too because they're really important and they need your help just as much as we do, and as your loved ones do. So I'm going to pause. I'm not going to cover that question just yet because I think it's going to come up naturally in a little bit. Julie?
I have a question. Michelle sent in, what accommodations, if any, for detainees in segregation? Does anybody know if there's any special accommodations that they make for people in segregation?
I can't speak to that directly right now. I might be able to after we could go through and look and talk with some of our friends in the legal community who've done some work on this. I will say that I've been in contact with people in SEG who were given access to communication for the first time regularly when COVID hit. And segregation became a blessing to, I mean, COVID became a blessing to them because it actually opened their door a little bit. I can't speak to any of the other stuff with any, deep knowledge right now, but I will commit to looking into that and getting back to you on it. Awesome. All right, so what can we do about this crap? It's awful. We don't want to leave it like this. We're in the middle of a big mess. So what can we do? I will say one thing we can do is look to our peers, look around you and look who's being successful right now, who's getting the governor's attention. And so before we get into this sort of really specific, what you can do for your loved one, I will say that I've been taking a lot of lessons from people who are advocating on behalf of people in the long-term care facilities in the state of Illinois. And it's a nightmare what's happening in them. We don't, by no means do we want to emulate the conditions in long-term care centers. Many of them are in real trouble right now. But their advocates have done an enormously successful job at focusing the state's attention on their plight and at focusing state resources on their plight. We have not. So as we go forward through this, and I'm the first to admit it, by the way, as we go forward through this section on what we can do, just keep in the back of your mind, what if it wasn't someone who was in prison? What if it was your grandmother in a long-term care center? Would you behave differently? Would you have different actions you could take? And are there things you're not doing because it's prison? So that's just one little thing that I've started asking myself recently. And it's been helping open my mind to some new ideas and possibilities. So what can you do for your loved one? So we have a couple of recommendations. These are not the only things you can do. You can do a lot of things, but these are our specific recommendations today. One is that you can communicate with your loved one often and take notes. Take notes with a date. So what, if your loved one calls you and you're able to pick up the phone, jot down the time of the call, and before you get into whatever it is you're going to get into, just take a minute to ask them how things are going with the COVID response at their facility. These notes are gold for a variety of really good reasons. They've become the basis for direct advocacy with the department. In one case, over about a 5-day period, a 3 or 4 or 5-day period, we got a really kind of yucky number of reports, really consistent reports about people all of a sudden not getting their regular medications, not getting their inhaler, not getting their blood pressure medication. And we were able to do some direct and this is where the sort of administrative advocacy, picking up the phone, calling the legal director at the Department of Corrections and saying, you might want to get ahead of this thing. It's happening at this facility, and this facility. Because that's the kind of stuff that goes into lawsuits later, right? If somebody has problems because they don't have their inhaler because the facility didn't provide it. So take notes, write down the date. The next thing that we think everyone should do all of the time is use the elected official who's closest to you. Use your state rep. And we'll share a little bit more advice about how to do this, but just give them a call and let them know, I have a loved one, I'm your constituent, I have a loved one, and I would really appreciate it if you would become an advocate for safety in healthcare in prisons. you can contact the facility counseling staff. And this is it's a hard thing to do. And some people are really good at it and are really easy with it. And some people just are like, oh, I'm not going to call someone on staff at the prison. But we have talked to a number of family members of people who are incarcerated who've gotten a lot of good information from the counselor. For example, they've gotten information about who was on the early discretionary sentencing credit list for review. Was their loved one on it? Weren't they on it? Have they already been reviewed? Have they not been reviewed? You may not get anything from this call, but it's a step you can take and you'll feel good that you did it. And the final thing is to pursue clemency if appropriate. Our friends, I'm going to send you the slides, don't worry. So you'll have the links, you'll have all of the links, but our friends at the Illinois Prison Project created an incredible tool for families and friends, a toolkit on how to pursue clemency. And we will share that with you following our call. So calling the counselor, it's hard. I don't like doing it. These are my least favorite calls. But one really, really beautiful thing is to think of them as a potential friend, a potential ally, instead of thinking them as a roadblock or a barrier or a bureaucrat or a corrections officer who doesn't like inmates. Or, I know I have some friends in prison who they call them inmate haters, people who are on staff who really don't, who are never going to do anything nice for someone in that facility. Put that all out of your mind. Take a deep breath. Take a sip of your favorite non-caffeinated beverage. Put on some music, maybe a candle, a little mood lighting. Call them up. I've included some instructions for how to find the phone number of the facility itself if you don't know it. It's not common for people to know a facility phone number because you never get to call. They always have to call you. And when you get into your mood, you get into your Zen happy place, just ask them, I'm really concerned about Joe. And I've heard that a lot of people have gotten access to earned discretionary sentencing credits. Do you think he's eligible? What can it hurt? What can it hurt? Is there anything else he could take advantage of that might shave off some of his time? We're really worried about his health. The other thing that can happen is if you do get unlucky and you get on the phone with somebody who is not in a very good mood or who's messing with you or whatever, take notes. Be nice, always be nice, especially if you've used your loved one's name at any time during the call, be nice. And when you hang up, pleasantly, gently, hang up the phone, pick up the phone and call me or Julie or Wendell or Alyssa, and we can help you work through what you heard. Or send us an email and let us know. And we can also document what you were told. And again, not saying this is all going to go anywhere, but the idea of documenting trends, of understanding, are there facilities that are just hostile to using earned discretionary sentencing credits? If you go back to my earlier slide, it looks a lot to me like the facility counseling staff at Hill is hostile to earned discretionary sentencing credits. It looks that way from the data, right? So if a few people were to call the counseling staff at Hill and have really positive calls, that would undermine my theory. If they had negative calls, that might support my theory, but it would give us an advocacy path forward, right? And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for ways to make change. We're not looking for ways to, point the finger or blame anybody. We're looking for ways to help real people now. So take notes, listen, and share. Calling your state rep is not dissimilar, although this time I'm gonna say, instead of the smooth jazz, you want to get maybe a little Caribbean beat, maybe a little calypso. You want to zhuzh it up a little. You want to feel your power when you're calling your state rep. You are their boss. If you've done our advocacy training before, and I know many of you have, they work for you. They work for you. Be a good boss, be a nice boss, be a kind boss, but remember, they work for you. I've given us some instructions in the presentation on how to use their horrible website, which you all know, those of you who know me know how much I hate. And you'll be able to find their phone number, give them a call and say, my name is Joby, I'm your constituent. I'm concerned about my friend Mike, who is at Hill Correctional Center. Please call me back. I'd really like to have a conversation with you about how the legislature can get more active in this COVID response or something of the like. One of the things that we've found in our work recently is that legislators, not all, but many, feel really, really impotent right now. If they're not in the mainstream of totally 100% agreeing with the governor on everything, they're tired of losing. And they don't have a procedural way to win right now. So they're just waiting. They're waiting to get back in session and have a real say again. And hearing from constituents that their response, that the state response on prisons is inadequate, is critical. It's critical because they need to know that you are their constituent and you have a loved one in prison and you want them to represent you, which is their job. So those are sort of the really, really individual personal things you can do. And then there's sort of this direct action, getting involved in advocacy, big procedural organizational stuff that was part of the question that was asked earlier. So this is where I really want to get back to that. So we have found over time that particularly with family members, the family members on this call who've been part of CRIC from the beginning never give up. They don't get burned out after a couple of sessions. They don't get discouraged when they have to compromise on something. They keep coming back. And I'm convinced the reason people who are members of CRIC keep coming back is because we don't just say to CRIC members, family members who have loved ones in prison, do this advocacy action and we'll see you next time. We're a support group. I mean, Julie Anderson coordinates a family, basically support group of men and women who've been meeting together and talking together once a month for years and years and years, and they are open, arms wide open. So if you're a family member today and you feel alone and you feel like you don't have a ton of fortitude to tackle this whole mess on your own, join us. And if you don't want to join us, join someone else. But we're right here, and Julie's really great. And the CRIC members on this call are amazing. And the idea that we've been effective in advocacy year after year after year because we keep coming back. We don't get burned out. We don't let ourselves get discouraged because we support each other and we love each other and we share information and we're honest about it. That is a real distinguishing, I think, factor of CRIC and of Julie's work over the years, is to build that trust so that we're not just doing a big campaign one year and then you don't hear from us ever again. It's about support and love in addition to advocacy. So I hope that answers maybe part of the direct action question. We also have Wendell, who's, at least on my screen, who's down there. Wendell is coordinating a group, a very small, nascent, beautiful group of all men at this point, but could be women at some point, we hope, who've served really long sentences and are coming home. And there aren't a lot of folks of that category all the time. It's not as big a group, say, as people who are returning who've done a year or 2 years or 5 years. But this group meets informally and provides support to one another again, and hopefully engages in advocacy as well. If you are not already on our action list, sign up. So when it comes to this idea of direct action and versus more procedural policy advocacy, we at Restore, I'm not on this chart, so I just put up a chart of the different organizations, and there are many more, many more, but of some of the different organizations working in different arenas. And some of them cross over, but I just threw them where I thought they primarily live, and I'll probably pay for that later. But these are some of the groups we work with on a regular basis, who we love and have kind of strong ties with, who we don't always agree with all the time on everything, who maybe our strategies are wildly different in some cases. But these are groups that all collaborate in this space and provide an avenue for action for anybody who wants to get involved. So you may have been at the end of the session, you'd be like, if I have to hear that woman, Joby, say another word, I'm gonna jump out a window. I never wanna see her again, but I really wanna be involved. There's a lot of ways you can do it. There are, if you wanna support groups doing litigation, if you're a lawyer or you have a background in legal work, you can get involved in Uptown People's Law Center. You can donate to them. You could be, you know, a volunteer for one of their efforts. If you're interested in the clemency work, the Illinois Prison Project is killing it on clemencies. And they're a brand new organization. They need board members. They need donors. They need volunteers. They need friends, they need it all. For people who are really into what I would call activism or direct action, and this is the sort of organizing demonstrations, getting mass public attention for an issue, taking that extreme position and unapologetically demanding change. That's going to be your Mothers United Against Violence and Incarceration, or your Parole Illinois. There are a number of wonderful organizations out there that are taking to the streets with that kind of action. That's not our cup of tea as an organization, but it's incredibly important work, and they're doing it. So if that is your cup of tea, they might be good people to get involved with. On the reentry side, if you're sort of like, oh, this activism makes me squishy, I don't know, but I'm really concerned about people getting out and what they're going to do and where they're going to go. There are a number of groups doing incredible work. The two that really pop to top of mind right now are the Safer Foundation and Task. And the Safer Foundation and Task have been, forgive me, tasked by the governor with doing all of the housing and reentry for everybody. They're sort of the point of exit, you know, from the system and then entry into community. And it's a huge load. They're wonderful organizations, and I'm sure they use volunteers. Shriver Center for Policy Law is doing a number of really interesting bits of legal work around trying to open up public housing for people who were returning. So they have a place so they can come home instead of having to find alternative housing because of a stupid rule that says people with felony convictions aren't allowed to go back to public housing. And then there's a really neat coalition called the Illinois Coalition for Higher Ed in Prison. And they're a phenomenal group of prison educators who are really, every single one of them is an activist at heart. They're just bursting with this activist energy. And so they're doing things like creating reentry guides for the time of COVID, which is, you know, we didn't talk about this, but can you imagine coming out of prison after a really long sentence into this? It's, yeah. And people are doing it right now. And Illinois CHEP is providing resources for them. Administrative advocacy is sort of like, and these groups do more than that too. They do legislative advocacy too, but administrative advocacy is sort of more directly trying to massage and work with the bureaucracies that are trying to do the right thing, but don't quite have the resources or the motivation or the plan or the staff. And they're just giving them the push they need. And so Illinois Justice Project, phenomenal organization. They're backstopping tons of really important projects that are happening inside our government to try to make things better for people in prison. And the John Howard Association, which again, they're a watchdog. So every day they're on the phone with the Department of Corrections telling them, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And we don't always see that out here, but they're doing it. I know they're doing it because I see them doing it behind the scenes and sometimes in front. And then finally, we haven't talked at all about jails on this call because we're not jail people and we don't know anything about jails, but we know a little bit about jails. We don't know a lot about jails. But there are a number of really great groups who are doing advocacy, really robust advocacy, particularly around Cook County Jail, but the Chicago Community Bond Fund and actually we are partnering to try to get some advocacy on county jails outside of Cook County because there's not a lot going on to advocate for those guys. So we're trying a little bit. But the Chicago Community Bond Fund, Chicago Appleseed, Chicago Council and Lawyers are all phenomenal organizations putting a lot of pressure and coordinating a lot of the activities in Cook County. So there are lots of different ways to get involved. If you're the kind of person who wants to volunteer to help with reentry, to the kind of person who wants to get in their car and do a car rally or vigil outside of Stateville Correctional Center, and everything in between. I would say, where do we fit? Where does Restore Justice fit? There's a category I didn't put on this chart, and I call it policy advocacy. But I would also call it really deeply community-informed policy advocacy. So we pick a handful of policies to push for at any given time. We do whatever it takes to try to get them put into place. And everything we do is informed by what we would consider the reality of the situation. So our community we love with loved ones in prison, people we know who are really suffering and how we can help them. And then trying to at least take into account the reality of our opposition. And the reality that public officials aren't only hearing from us, they're hearing from people who disagree with us deeply, deeply disagree with us. And so we sort of see ourselves as policy advocates in opposition, in tension with policy advocates on the other side, vying to win the position of government, to win the policy position in our government, in our state. And getting involved with us, again, is really easy. We, like I said, we have different avenues for people to join our monthly meetings for family members with Crick, for returning citizens with Wendell, and for people who want to volunteer and just be involved in our larger advocacy campaigns, really just reaching out to me directly, or staying involved through all of our action alerts and events like this one and spreading the word. We deeply, deeply need you and appreciate you, those of you who've been here for us for a very long time and with us as we've built this. I hope that helps you see sort of how we fit in this ecosystem. We love these organizations.
Can I ask you a few questions people have shared?
Yes.
Who is responsible for conducting inspections at prisons in Illinois? Is someone really assessing conditions?
That's such a great question. So we have one I can't find the right word. We have a watchdog organization that has permission to actions, and that is the John Howard Association. They have professional staff, but they also have volunteer teams who they train, have the agreement of IDOC to be able to come in. And so there's always sort of a tension, I think, when you have, that agreement is a challenge, I know, because they're super radical. They have a million things they want to ask for, but they have to be really careful that they retain their access to each facility. And so I think they do a phenomenal job of walking that line, and they're getting better and better at it every day, as far as I see. There are no other watchdogs. One of the things we do, we are coming, we're hopefully going to be releasing calling on the governor to, we've stopped short of that up until now, but I'm losing patience with it. And I think in long-term care centers where it's have gone off the rails, IDPH teams are sent in to do spot checks, and they're not always announced. And I think we need to do that with prisons. All right, Alyssa, did I get it?
Yes, one more question, a really good question. Linda asked, if you have representatives that you know are kind of hostile to reform, is it still important to talk to them, or can you just talk to ones you know hear you?
So I have opinions about this. I've got opinions, and you may not agree with my opinions, but here's the thing. The only representative in the state of Illinois who has to listen to you is your own. So whether they agree with you or disagree with you, you need to talk to them. Every other representative, unless you're a professional lobbyist or advocate, they're probably not going to hear you unless you're in a context or a situation where their mind's a little bit open. So I would recommend, regardless of their politics, getting to know your rep. Your rep is the most important person in the whole world. And if they don't know you and how passionate you are, then how can they represent you properly? Whatever side of the aisle they're on. And maybe you will change their mind. Maybe you'll open their mind. Like days of advocating against organization, and we share a state rep. And in the early days, it was like we were vying for our state rep's vote. Would have spoken with this victim, family member, and then would say, how can you do this, Joby? I know time, how can you do this? And I would sort of calmly go through my spiel and try to just, I understand people vary on these things. They're very difficult issues. We'd hang up and a month or two would go by. And my kind of belief about these types of things is that they all sort of come out the way they're supposed to. And in the end of the day, this particular individual got very angry, got very upset, was sort of threatening the rep. And over time, the rep decided to vote their conscience instead of, which happened to be sharing our opinion, rather than voting with the person who was yelling at them, really, and threatening them. So it can get very sticky. Stay on the high road, stay on your side of the street. and it should be okay. If you're involved with an organization, I think it's really important to identify people in the middle. I think we have, for example, we have 118 state reps. Of those 118 state reps, you need 60 to pass a bill, which means there are a certain number of reps you can write off. You just have to write off the right ones. So you have to, sometimes there are people in the middle who really can be moved, or people who you think or know who can be moved. So in any campaign, I would recommend getting to know as many people as possible and never closing your mind or your ears. And, yes, you're going to end up writing some people off over time, but certainly not all of them. Any other questions, Alyssa?
Yeah, I think the last one is just about how, or we just got one more, but first, how closely the organizations are working together, and maybe you can tell everyone how we created specific demands with the Illinois Prison Project.
Yeah, and why don't you tell me that last question too, because we've only got 1 minute, so I'll try to wrap it all up.
Actually, it was just thanks, and Margaret,
that's nice.
Thank you, and Julie, for your answer about family members.
Awesome, thanks. So the question is, how do we work together? I think some of us have found natural affinity, sort of organic affinity with each other. For example, I think when we started working on our recommendations to the governor, we found a real affinity with the Illinois Prison Project around their legal analysis of recommendations that would be logical. And I think they found affinity with us on the way we publicly message early release, and that we're very middle of the road. We're very careful. We don't, with all of that I said about victims, I work very hard not to enervate or alienate victim family members, because, and at the risk of enervating or alienating someone else, I will say that some of the messaging out there around liberation and freeing of folks in the system that I agree with, and that we all agree with wholeheartedly, enervates our opposition in a way that it activates our opposition. And so we work really hard not to do that. There's a role for it and we support it, but that's not us. And so when we were drafting recommendations, we had an affinity with the Illinois Prison Project. The good news is, groups that don't necessarily buy into everything we do, we're still promoting our recommendations and we're still promoting their rallies. We don't work together quite as closely, but we're amplifying shared messages, if that makes sense. But behind the scenes, I think there are people we naturally, maybe our strategies seem to align more closely. There have definitely been not a division, it's a perfectly happy and functional division between the people who really are focused on Cook County Jail and the people who are focused on the Illinois Department of Corrections. And those groups have sort of formed into little nice, happy little camps and share information. We're on a lot of the same daily email updates. With the Northwestern Law School, we helped create a shared, an internal advocate website with different advocacy letters and all the freedom of information requests and things like that are out there, demand letters from activist groups, so that we had a sense of who's asking for what, and trying to keep that updated and keep information flowing. So we are at time, we're at 2:31. I'm afraid we've got to close this for the day. It's so weird doing a webinar and not being able to hug people and stick around and chat afterwards, and it kind of breaks my heart, because I know there are a lot of people on this list of names that I see who I love dearly and would love to hug. And there are people I haven't met yet who could be our new best friends. And I miss people. I miss you guys. So be good, be well. I will send out slides and feel free to give us feedback. We'd love feedback on how we can get better at this our first time. And we do need to get better at the technology part, but hopefully we've made a start. Thank you for coming out today, and be well. Take care.
Thank you all. Cool.
I've got let's see.
Cool.